Well, right now, ICE is responsible for another deadly attack. Islamic State militants driving a tank rigged with explosives, killing at least 38 people at a joint security force base south of Samarra in the Anbar province. This latest violence comes as Senator Lindsey Graham announces his candidacy for president. One of his top priorities, combating the terrorists with 10,000 U.S. troops in Iraq.
We've learned over the past 6 years that speeches alone won't make us safe. If that were true, we'd be really safe. Superior power and resolve is the only way to be safe. I'm running for President of the United States because I am ready to be Commander-in-Chief on day one.
Ben Collins is joining us, U.S. Army Special Forces veteran, Green Beret, who served 3 tours of duty in Afghanistan. So the 10,000 number that we talked about in the intro, wanting to put 10,000 troops in Iraq or bring our levels back there, is what Senator Graham advocated when we withdrew from Iraq. Do you think having 10,000 troops there now would make a difference?
So I think it depends on what type of troops they are, right? So we have something that's called tail-to-tooth ratio. So generally for every combat troop, we need about 3 or 4 support troops. So if that's a total number, then, you know, if it's 10,000, then we're probably looking at about 2,500 actual combat troops. And I think if that number is sufficient or not, it depends on what type of role they're going to play.
So is it less about quantity and more about mission?
I think so, absolutely. So I certainly don't. I don't think he is advocating, or I would advocate, you know, that this is something for a conventional infantry unit, you know, your 82nd Airborne or your 101st. I think 2,500 special operations troops would probably be about the right number, and with the requisite support from, you know, close air support and medical and things like that.
David Petraeus, of course, who is the architect of the surge, and I believe you served under as well, David Petraeus, was recently talking about what's going on in Iraq. And he made the point that he felt that ISIS was not the same enemy as al-Qaeda, that al-Qaeda was actually more of a challenging enemy because they were ingrained in the local populace and they were more organized. But he had this to say about the recent capture of Ramadi. He said a strategic loss in the sense that the narrative of ISIS being on the defensive, of losing, was shown to be somewhat hollow. That's what he said. Since he was the architect of the surge, again, do you think a surge now would work here in the same way that it worked against al-Qaeda?
So I think it would. However, this has to be a civil military solution, right? So there is a narrative that ISIS has been using very successfully, and that is that the Sunnis have been essentially pushed to the side by the Shia government. So there's a political solution that has to take place, right, where the Sunnis are brought back into the fold of government and make, you know, and not just in words but in deeds brought them into the fold. But you're also, you know, when it comes to ISIS, they have a conventional army, right? So they have their troops in the field, but it's also, we have to fight a counterinsurgency, right? Because they are winning hearts and minds of parts of the populace that we need to combat.
So the New York Times addressed this today in an editorial and said what we really need to be doing is not putting troops back in, but actually going to the Sunni tribes, again, the ones that we feel that we can help, and investing in them, because they're not getting the political solution in Baghdad. Do you think that would be wise?
Well, no. Look, to be honest, I think when we left Iraq, you know, we took their confidence, essentially. You know, for the Iraqi army, you know, they have been very well trained. However, there's something profoundly psychologically powerful and physically powerful when you know as a soldier on the ground that you have American close air support, and if anything happens, you've got medical evacuation that can be brought to bear. If you remove that, then you really, these guys are out there sort of untethered without that support. And so I certainly don't think that they're going to be able to win it on their own. And I think that just a purely political effort won't, I mean, it's certainly not going to convince ISIS to put their weapons down.
So in the meantime, one of the Shia militia commanders has been interviewed, and he's shown to have close ties with Iran, and specifically the Revolutionary Guard. And he's saying, we're actually not going back to Ramadi right now. We don't see that being a value. We have a different strategy. We're going to try to cut off ISIS supply routes. But what is raising some questions about that is, of course, the connection to Iran, but also it looks like they're trying to create a dividing line between the Shia part of Iraq and the Sunni part of Iraq. And here we are back wondering about the civil war in Iraq and what that would mean to us. What do you think is really at stake right now in Iraq for us?
So, you know, if you really look at, you know, there's the tactical question, right, which we've discussed about, right? Can we defeat these individuals on the ground? But then there's a strategic overarching questions that need to be asked. So could we physically push, these soldiers out of Iraq? The answer is yes. We would effectively, though, be pushing them into Syria, right? So I think one of the things that the leadership is going to have to ask themselves is what kind of a Middle East do they actually want to recognize within 10 years? Iran has been pushing their, a way to remake the map, so to speak. But if we don't have a plan or solution to go into Syria and meet the enemy there, I think we are going to slowly start seeing almost a remake of the map, right, where they're going to start partitioning.
And would that be okay?
To be honest, I think we've watched over hundreds of years that that map shifts as the sand does over there. So I believe so. But we're definitely going to see, unless there's a real effort to come up with a plan to oust Assad, who Iran has backed, right? So they're more probably incentivized to allow a partition for his kind of survival. But I do think we're going to see a partitioned.
We're hearing a little bit more of that also from some of our recent interviews, getting more comfortable with the different way the Middle East looks and seeing if we can find allies where we can within a new change to the map. So that might be an interesting way to approach this as we go into the next year. Ben, great to see you as always. Thank you very much. John?